Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Greetings, residents and citizens of Jacksonville. We will bring this meeting of the Jacksonville Planning Advisory Board for November 12th to order, and we will begin by having the Pledge of Allegiance. Nick, if you'd be so kind, sir.
Yes, sir. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Spring?
Our Heavenly Father, we thank you for this chance to come together tonight. We pray that you be with our minds and our hearts to do what's best for the citizens of Jacksonville. We pray that you help those that are suffering and those that need our prayers. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, sir. You've had a chance to have the agenda in front of you. I would entertain a motion.
Motion to approve the agenda as presented.
We have a motion. I need a second. Grace of the second. All in favor of accepting the agenda as presented, please signify with right hand. There we go. Our minutes from the last meeting, which was October 14th. You've had a chance to review those. If there's any corrections that are necessary, if not, I would entertain a motion to accept the minutes as presented.
I make a motion.
Grace made a motion to accept the minutes. Do I have a second?
Second.
Second by Homer. All in favor, signify by raising your right hand. Any opposed? All right, and our hero, Councilman Logan Sosa, is not available this evening. Ryan, do you know, is there any information that he would like to pass to us in his absence?
Sure, I'll read you a report here. On the 22nd of October, City Council approved, after conducting public hearings, approved the map amendment for 3155 New Bern Highway from residential multifamily density to quarter commercial. That's one out there across from the Stevenson Hendrick Toyota dealership. Then they also amended the Unified Development Ordinance for the buffer yard standards in downtown. And they conducted a public hearing and then deferred action on the amendment to Article 4 use standards for accessory use standards and outside display in Article 512 signage. That's going back next Tuesday night for City Council at 5:30. They'll reconvene that public hearing. And I think that's all that we had to report.
Great. Did they make do you know if a change on that sign ordinance?
I know that there were some questions that came up about the political signs and the state statutes and what we were proposing, the city versus state rights of way and how that comes into play. And the other was
holiday sign or holiday decoration issue.
Yes, there were some questions about residential versus commercial and the number of days. We had proposed at 30 days, and I think they felt like maybe there needed to be a little bit more time. So we've looked at some other codes as they requested, and then we're going to give them a couple of options.
Very good. Thank you. We look forward to hearing the update on that one. All right. Seeing we have no old business, looks like we have 3 items of business. Chairman, you're on.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Planning Advisory Board. First is one of 3 Unified Development Ordinance text amendments that staff is bringing to the board's attention in review and consideration. Agenda item 1 is a UDO, Unified Development Ordinance text amendment regarding townhouse lot. Until recently, the city had not seen any new townhouse development request since the adoption of the Unified Development Ordinance in 2014. Recently, we've received a number of new proposed developments, and it's brought in light an issue with lot width requirements for townhomes, and found that the UDO is not conducive with what is typically the industry standard for townhome design. Currently, the Unified Development Ordinance requires under the residential multifamily high-density zoning district, townhome lots be a minimum of 25 feet wide. That adoption then in 2014 made several, if not all, of our previously approved townhome developments non-conforming. And so, working with Tidewater and Associates, they've submitted a request to amend that section of the ordinance under the residential multifamily high-density zoning district to remove the minimum lot size and lot width restrictions from townhomes, bringing it in line with multifamily in that same zoning district. The proposed amendment is in attachment A. Again, it's just a modification of that table, removing or adding the exemption of lot width and lot size to townhouse. With that said, staff is recommending that the Planning Advisory Board consider recommending approval of this text amendment, and that it is consistent with the adopted Campbell Land Use Plan, Policy 6.9, encourages a balance of land use mix through flexible zoning and subdivision regulations that facilitate compatible of development of a variety of housing types and density. Again, this change, if approved by City Council, would correct many non-conforming situations throughout the city in regards to townhome developments. Lori Morris from Tidewater and Associates, along with staff, are here to answer any questions that the board may have.
Very good. Jeremy, is this consistent with other communities? Did you see what, say Wilmington or somebody else was doing?
We didn't go into that depth. I have looked at Wilmington's before because one of the many townhome type developments we've seen. I believe they actually have an 18-foot, which is basically nothing.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Yeah, that would be your minimum size down. So I think Lori, when we were talking with her, I think we found most of ours are 18 to 20 is what you're, 16.
Normal is 16.
So,
If it has a garage, they're normally 20.
right. But we did not do an in-depth investigation on any adjacent cities or sister cities, as we call them.
Well, it seems like that'll be a self-licking lollipop in the sense that if you're going to make it to an industry standard,
Right.
that's what sells.
And townhomes still had to meet
If you
building
make it
code.
10 feet wide, you probably aren't going to sell many of them.
I would agree.
Yeah. Anybody else? If there are no further questions, I would be open to entertaining a motion that is consistent with the recommendation of staff.
Motion to approve the UDO text amendment found in attachment A.
Anybody want- I got a second over here from Grace, thank you.
You don't
Any-
need to say all that.
Any further discussion? Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Like sign. Motion carries. All right, Jeremy, we got one.
Yep, thank you,
Number
sir. Agenda item 2 is a Unified Development Ordinance text amendment regarding primary drive aisles, and that is found in our Article 5 Development Standards, off-street parking standards. Primary drive aisles were incorporated into the Unified Development Ordinance when it was adopted in 2014. A primary drive aisle applies to developments that have 300 spaces or more. It is if the only one we've approved that's in functioning is in front of or perpendicular to Academy Sports. Academy Sports has a proposed second phase that would come when you have basically an extension of the street that comes into the site that operates and very much like a street, has parallel parking on either side to funnel traffic into the site and disperse it either way as it gets to the building. This can prove difficult to apply in some situations that we've looked at projects that would exceed that 300 space limitation. We have not had to put it in because we have not had that many large commercial subdivisions. The closest one would be the Publix shopping center, but Publix is on its own individual lot and doesn't have in excess of 300 spaces. However, with all that said, remembering the difficulties we had with Academy Sports, Tidewater Associates submitted an application to change the ordinance to basically grant the TRC, the Technical Review Committee that reviews site plans, the flexibility to determine the best location for primary drive aisles and to, when required, not to have the parallel parking spaces. Staff has removed this. We've even gone as far as looking as, does this have a place in our Unified Development Ordinance? And we think it does. As land becomes less available in properties and you have sites that need to redevelop, some of our larger sites, I think of Target and Newmarket Square, both of the older Walmarts now, could benefit from a reanalysis and TRC looking at it for the primary drive aisle standards. So with that said, we are in favor, staff is in favor of this change to grant the TRC flexibility in determining the best location for a primary drive aisle, and are recommending that the Planning Advisory Board also recommend to City Council approval, finding that it is consistent with CAMA Plan Policy 38.2, that we revise development regulations to be responsive to innovative development proposals and existing conditions. Again, with the primary drive aisle as it exists now, obviously there's a number of sites in town that are non-conforming because they're large. Jacksonville Mall comes to mind, Newmarket Square with its large parking lot in excess of 700 spaces on that site. If they were to come in and redevelop, would have to do a primary drive aisle, and as laid out in the ordinance now, would have difficulty doing that. So granting TRC that ability would help tremendously.
Is it a safety issue, Jeremy?
It's more of a traffic flow in terms of getting into the site and moving around it internally. Fire lanes and fires along the buildings and stuff are already required. Those will be there regardless.
Okay. So help me understand, and I hope I'm going to ask a question here that others might be thinking, why do we want to tell them how to move traffic around inside of a parking lot? I get access, but once they're inside, that seems as though that's their responsibility.
Correct. But this is also an opportunity where it's primarily going to, with those multi-tenant facilities. If it's a single tenant, maybe that the traffic circulation isn't a big issue, but where you may have a anchor tenant in one side of the building, two drive-through restaurants in other portions, and then the ability to enter the site, get around and maneuver. So, from a design aspect, it will keep it clean. It has that design character of having an avenue or kind of your Broadway internal access to a development maintained by the developer, but get around the site safely.
Yeah, Jeremy, I was getting ready to kind of echo that basically, you remember some of what we're dealing with is also design.
Yeah.
And that's really what this was, a design feature, but this is one that we've talked about for many years now. We just haven't really had a need to, focus on making an adjustment. But this has not been a popular thing that's been in the ordinance for as long as we've had it.
Yeah.
Just because of the way that, it really restricts developments that are over 300 parking spaces in terms of land area and how they want to lay the site out. So,
In my previous career, working with, I guess probably the best thing is one of those large anchor places. When they design those facilities, they design everything anyway, parking lots, lighting, the curbing and all that. And they've got people that are professionals at that. I hadn't considered the fact that they may be located next to somebody else and you're trying to.
But it is, and I failed to mention that early on, but it's that designed. Right now, the way it's laid out is a developer kind of has to look at it and say, well, why would I do this primary drive aisle? I'll just build a street dedicated to the city and I want to take care of it. We want it to be a design element that's maintained by the property, looks good, and operates from a safety measure.
Is the parallel parking, is that part of, that's a new addition?
That's our current requirement. We would be doing, that would be removed.
Removing, so you do not have to put parallel parking into the driveway?
Unless it's determined with working with the TRC. It could be something that We're not going to say you can't do parallel parking if it works.
This gives you flexibility. Okay. So this is like, I guess, like Mayfair and Wilmington. This sort of gives.
That always comes to mind when you look, and, without seeing that design, but when you look at it, I don't know if the street going into Mayfair is a City of Wilmington street, but for the most part, that's how it operates. Whereas they have diagonal parking along their facility, the way ours operates right now would have parallel along that facility.
Completely coincidental, but have you seen the Academy Sporting Goods in Wilmington?
I've only seen the one here.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you ever go to the Academy, which there's no reason because we have one here, right?
Yeah.
But if you ever see the one that's down there by the Costco, they basically have this facility in front of the store. I mean, it looks very similar. You got parallel spaces, landscaped islands, crosswalk to go from the main parking lot over into the store. Now, maybe that's what they needed to make the site work. Maybe it's a design feature that Wilmington has, not sure. But if you want to see one that's actually on the ground, close by Wilmington in front of the Academy.
So this would affect the mall, for instance, if they were to do a major redevelopment.
Yeah, if they
would-
triggered compliance, yes, it could impact them, but give us that flexibility to work with their engineers and their designers to say, hey, yes, that works. That still meets the intent of what a primary drive aisle should be.
Is it possible that if, in Chase's example, that the mall does a redevelopment, that they would look at what the mall has and say, this works pretty good, and they would leave it as is?
I think that anything, by giving TRC that flexibility, they can make that determination.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, because I think the mall currently works. I don't think they should be punished for the way it's currently set up, I guess, would be my.
They're just
fear in this.
excessively overparked. I mean, that is,
Once you took
whenever you
out of
want to say
there,
a sea of asphalt, that's the adage is the mall and Newmarket Square, and rightfully, at least Newmarket Square for years used it for the overflow for Jacksonville High School. But the mall comes to mind. I mean, they're overparked by 800 some spaces. Newmarket Square is over by 600 in terms of today's standards. That's not saying they don't need that, and if they were new approvals, there's mechanisms to try to get additional parking. But they are products of old code.
Gotcha. Anybody else got a question? If not,
I make a motion that the Planning Advisory Board approve the UDO tax amendment found in attachment A.
very good. Anybody?
I'll second that.
Chase has got a second on that. Okay, any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Very good. You're 2 for 2, Jeremy.
All right, number 3. This is a staff-initiated text amendment to the Unified Development Ordinance. And this relates to, I think, and Ryan can correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's the first time since the adoption of the Unified Development Ordinance that we brought something related to Section 5.8, small non-residential design standards, and 5.9, large non-residential design standards. These two sections of the UDO have governed how commercial use building, commercial uses that are within the commercial use category, retail, large shopping centers and whatnot. This is what's governed how those facilities look like, drive-through restaurants. With this adoption of the UDO in 2014 came a requirement for glazing. That's a certain amount of percentage of windows at the street, of street-facing facades. Currently, in the small non-residential, will require any street-facing facade to have 15% glazing. Glazing is windows or doors, glass. If you're large, that's anything 40,000 square feet and larger, is 12%. Part of the current requirements is any areas between 3 to 8 feet above the walking grade have to remain visibly permeable. This creates an issue when it conflicts with our sign standards. And it's not a conflicting as much as it creates difficulties in determining sign allowance and where signage can go on a building. Currently, window signage is allowed via our wall sign allowance. We allow 2 square feet of signage per 1 linear feet of your front wall. And so if say you have a 50-foot wide building, you're allowed 100 square feet of signage. Easy calculation. All right, I can do 100 square feet, I could do 250 square foot signs. You can also put signage on your windows, but you can't put it between 3 and 8 feet. So that creates a calculation nightmare for citizens, sign installers, and staff on trying to review that. How do you try to calculate between 3 and 8 feet? So staff is bringing forward a text amendment that would basically remove the glazing out of the section 5.8 and unify it under 5.9, your glazing requirement, still maintain the 15% for small non-residential, 12% for large, but remove the 3 to 8 feet requirement to be permeable. Meaning that if you have additional glazing, you can put up signage. It doesn't matter where it is on the windows. If it's above if you have 20% glazing, you got 5% windows, you can start putting some signage on. With this,
If you have allotment
yes.
left.
With this, we are also adding some clarity on how tint should be treated. Some buildings that we allow to use the faux windows, it's pre-tinted glass, so it still has that glass appearance. But we do not think the ordinance intended for you to have a clear glass glazing and to slap flat tint or vinyl over it, and you're basically done away with your glass appearance. So we're clarifying that if you add tint to a window, put it on the inside of the window. That way you maintain your glass appearance. It still looks like glass. It looks like tinted glass, and we protected it from a glazing standpoint. You wouldn't lose glazing if it's treated from the inside. I know it's a little tricky when you talk about that 3 to 8 feet, so please ask any questions. But with all that said, staff is recommending that we approve this change to the Unified Development Ordinance that is consistent with CAMA Policy 3.2. Again, revised development regulations to be responsive to innovative development proposals and existing conditions. Again, this is an effort to make it easier for citizens, sign installers, and staff in reviewing signage applications by removing that 3 to 8 feet requirement or standard. It does alleviate a lot of headache trying to do some crazy math, so to speak, and how do you apply, this is my 3 to 8 feet that I can't use, and then, so it's an effort.
So 2 things, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to add to that is that you've got some businesses that are exempt and could ask for, say, for example, banks, financial institutions, offices. So let's say that's what goes in there to begin with, and they do something to where it's not visually permeable 3 to 8 feet. And then they go out of business or they sell to somebody else, and now a retailer goes to go in there. They're not going to meet that 3 to 8 foot standard. So now what? So the other thing is, all right, so you've got glass that's right there. Nothing says that you can't hang those curtains right on the inside of that window.
Yeah. Well, what drives that a lot with the tinting and curtains is if you have west-facing.
That's right. That was another one that I was going to bring up is which face, are you facing? They want to be able to tint. Well, right now, if you're retail, you can't do it. And then the other component is you have some folks to where the way that their layout of their inside of their business, they may have their cash registers in offices at the front, and they don't mind putting the glass in because we require it, but they don't want it to be visible into that area.
Sure.
So there's some spin-off positives to this, but what's created this, as Jeremy stated, is the signage calculations. When we created that 2 square feet for every 1 linear feet, it's very simple. Anybody can take a tape measure out, measure it. Hey, I know I can have 25 square feet. Well, now it's like, oh, but now let me back out the 3 to 8 foot, and how much percentage do I have left, and can I cover it? It's going to eliminate that challenge that has created some headaches. And so we're very much in support of getting rid of this. Because, it's a challenge during the upfront portion, but then after it gets built, there's things that people can do, and then you've kind of defeated the purpose to begin with, so.
Did you look at any benchmarking for other cities that how they handle this thing? Or is what you're coming up with pretty consistent?
So and with some cities, it's very easy to look at it. They don't allow window signage. And I couldn't tell you which ones, but there are some communities that don't allow any signage in the windows. Some of the counties and cities that we looked at, I would probably venture to say they're not enforcing their sign standards, or there may be more to it. You can often reach out to a community and say, hey, I looked at this in your sign standards. And they're like, yes, that's what the ordinance reads, but it doesn't necessarily enforce that way. Sometimes it can be flexible on how they're handling it. And everyone has different kind of design standards, but we never did a deep dive on looking at a comparison here. Usually we'll do that comparison a lot of times if council requests it, or if it's something that's a little bit more quantitative, but we did not dive into that with this.
Well, I mean, I can think of examples where somebody would want no tint and,
Right.
and like a jewelry store frontage. They want you to walk by and be
Sure.
attracted to what you're seeing, and,
They can still do that.
you know,
This just allows those that don't want to have that 3 to 8 feet visually permeable. They want to be able to put curtains on the inside.
yeah.
Does this affect like gun shops, for instance? A lot of them I've noticed have some sort of a barrier that comes down at night time.
This would be separate of any kind of security barrier. The new Hibbett Sports has a security barrier that comes down or closes up. I know while you can't see them, every unit in the mall has a barrier that comes down. I think this, just unfortunately, this day and time, that's a security aspect. But this would not, if they're open, that barrier won't be down.
So if it says that it's got to be visually permeable 3 to 8 feet, you could argue that them rolling that security down on the inside, now they're not compliant. Now, if there's a provision for them to get an approval for those security reasons, which there is, well, then they could come and say, hey, we want to get this exemption. What we're saying is, we're just not going to regulate it anymore. We're going to get rid of this 3 to 8 foot visually permeable standard. This is kind of a self-serving deal, although it's going to help the sign companies out. It's going to help the citizens where they're trying to do their own calculations.
Yeah.
It's just one less layer of calculations we've got to try to determine, and just going to make it easier.
And I touched on, making it specifically to say that this is the first time we brought this section of the ordinance to the board. Ryan and I discussed, we're going on 10 years now with the over 10 years with the Unified Development Ordinance. And we may be coming back with this section, these two sections, in terms of reworking some of the language of what's been working, what doesn't work, and trying to make it more consistent across the board. Because there are issues with this section of the ordinance. We have non-residential design standards, but it applies specifically to a certain category of uses. So you could easily have a doctor's office that is metal, just a metal box. They don't have to meet any kind of design criteria because of the use category they fall under. And then next door, we've got a Zaxby's, and we're saying, well, you got to have a brick facade, you got to have a Veraping parapet, you got a hydromechanical, and you got to have this much glass. And that doesn't seem fair and equitable from a ordinance standard. But I wanted to use that as kind of a breach that in the future, staff may be bringing some additional amendments to these sections to make that design standards more consistent across the board.
We'll probably look to blend the two into one as well, somehow.
Because I think our new buildings since 2014 are all looking really good.
Absolutely.
It is a stark contrast of what we required prior, or what we couldn't require, versus now with your new Chick-fil-A's. The new Chick-fil-A looks great. Any of the new facilities. The Burlington Coats was one of the first big facilities that applied standards. And I think Nick, as a contractor, can understand some of the glazing issues we've had in terms of.
Yeah.
For the tent portion of it, there's a restaurant I like to eat at. They put some signs up inside the building, I guess. Does it matter if they're on the outside of the building or if they're in the inside?
Signage is signage at this point, if it's inside or outside. If it's there to get your attention, to bring you to the site, that signage is signage, whether it's on the inside or outside of the glass.
So you're not viewing, if it's on the inside of the building, it's not
still-
viewed as tent, it's viewed as signage, not
Right.
tent.
Yeah, we have a very broad and encompassing sign definition right now, and that would easily meet that definition.
So since we're kind of talking about some other items, when we created the standard, which we gave 2 square feet for every 1 linear foot of frontage, that was intended for everything on that facade. When we talk to national companies, when we look at other ordinances, a lot of other people do 1 or 1.5. We do 2. The idea behind that is you got wall signage and then you have window signage. That's every bit of your facade signage.
Gotcha.
Some of these folks are basically maxing out their main big wall sign, and then they want to come back and do stuff in the windows. You used it all up there. So one of the things that I want you to kind of track with where I'm headed with this. This isn't part of this. This is future, so don't let me derail this with the next piece. But if we look to make a change, like some people do, well, instead of 2 square feet, we're going to only give you 1, and then you can have 30% of your glazing with additional signage. Well, everybody that's maxed out, you just made them non-conforming signs. The other thing is, you've got 1,000 square feet of glazing. Jeremy's got none. So you get to do an extra 300 square feet of that 1,000 square feet of glazing because you have glass. Jeremy doesn't have glass, so Jeremy's just out of luck.
Yeah, doesn't
Doesn't seem equitable. So, those are some pieces that we're going to be bringing forth when we can kind of come up with some solutions. And one of the things that I was going to mention too, if you notice 2 of these 3 tonight, they've been submitted by Tidewater. One of the things that I'm going to look to talk with the upcoming fee schedule is a situation where just to throw it on the window for, on the wall for a minute to think about it, is a sponsored amendment. And what I mean by that is they've paid an application fee to the tune of $550, I believe it is, twice to make these 2 changes, both of which staff is in support of and believes it needs to happen. We like having a sponsor because sometimes when other people outside of staff say, hey, I think that we need this change, it's important that we have that buy-in from other folks. It's not just staff making the change.
Well, yeah, the user.
That's right. So, it's one of those things where if we can come up with a fee schedule situation where if somebody has a discussion with staff and basically they would sponsor a staff-initiated amendment request, that we somehow don't charge them a fee for it. That we go ahead and support it, but yet they kind of sign on saying, hey, this needs to be done. I don't know what that will look like, but that's something I've been thinking about in terms of, we're getting ready to be into the FY26 budget cycle, and the fee schedule amendments, if any, will be due here in the next month or 2. And that's one, that's come to mind with these 2 applications that they've made. I think they've made 1 or 2 in the last couple of months. They did the downtown buffering, so that's a 3rd one. And then there's probably been some other ones. And it's one of those things where, is that right? I mean, when we know that it needs to be done, but maybe this is not on the front burner because we're working on other things, by having that sponsored situation because they kind of need it done sooner than later, even if it's some sort of a 50% break or something. I don't know what that would look like, but just as a sidebar.
Yeah.
Well, I will add that, not a direct comparison to the glazing requirement, but as we've talked about our sign allowances, and how we allow the window signage as part of your wall signage, a comparison directly to our down the street, Onslow County, allows a similar formula at 1 square foot per 1 foot of width. They only allow you 1 sign. Whereas if you're allowed, say you're allowed 20 square feet, you can do as many signs as you want within that 20 square feet.
Sure.
Whereas with Onslow County, currently their ordinance says you're only allowed 1 wall sign.
Okay, before we realized that, we were having a discussion with one of the sign vendors. We're like, well, maybe we should just switch to, mirror Onslow County. They're like, please don't do that. We're trying to get them to switch to yours. So, Because, we're all here locally, but we all don't have the same sign codes. And maybe we should. I mean, we're urban, they're more rural.
Yeah.
But in that case here, it sounds like we give a little bit more latitude for signage than what their code says.
And removing this 3 to 8 feet creates a great deal of more flexibility.
Jeremy, would this have any effect on like a building that's maybe not used for retail space, like maybe more commercial use? Like I'm just going to use maybe Longley Supply, for instance. They have very limited.
They still fall within the current commercial use category because we do not have a separate building supply. The old zoning code used to have a builder's supply, but now they just fall under general retail or wholesale. So they would be subject to the same glazing requirements.
So would we be we'd be making them non-conforming? I mean, without really looking at it, or is it still?
It would still be subject, I mean, this doesn't create or really change any nonconformances. This just gives us that flexibility in applying signage. They would be, as anything adopted when the Unified Development Ordinance was adopted in 2014, a number of sites throughout the city were made nonconforming. They can continue to exist. They're basically legal nonconformities.
Right.
Or they may just have some building components that don't meet current standards.
Right.
Any further questions? Would be interested in entertaining a motion to either agree or disagree with staff on this?
I'd like to recommend a motion for the approval of the UDO text amendment found in attachment A.
Second that.
We have a second? Nick? No. Homer? Okay, any further discussion? Okay, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, like sign? We're good?
Thank you very
Three?
much.
Thank you for that, and I really appreciate, trying to make it a little easier on the citizenry, so that's. All right, next item up to bid here. Ryan, do you have a report from the Planning and Inspections Department?
We'll be back at our normal Monday, date next month. I believe we will have agenda items for
We got at
consideration.
least 2 at the moment.
So, right before the holidays, or in between holidays.
So we will have items up for bid?
Yes.
Okay, very good.
And then with that, that concludes my report, other than the, our planning moment here.
We've tried to include, and for those folks at home, this is a rather technical and filled with all kinds of acronyms and things, but in an effort to try and educate us and the folks at home that might have questions, we've come up with kind of the topic of the month. And this month's topic is accessory buildings. And accessory buildings could be a shed, a she shed, and anything else that Ryan tells us, he said an ATM falls into that category, so.
That's what Article 4 tells us. Not Ryan,
Sorry.
not Jeremy.
Ryan
What
parrots Article 4.
says. It has its own accessory use table in the Unified Development Ordinance.
There you go.
And ATMs are one, sheds, garages, detached garages.
And probably
slew
what
of
most
items.
folks, that if somebody were watching this, they might say, I've got a nice big backyard, I'd like to put some sort of a shed back there. Do I need a permit?
Yes. So as of 2014, prior to 2014, you only needed a building permit in certain situations. Commercial always required a permit. Residential, if it was larger than 12. So, you could have a 10 by 10 by 10 and you didn't need a permit back then. If you had a 10 by 14 by 10, well, that 14 is greater than 12, so it needed a building permit.
Yeah.
But with the Unified Development Ordinance, now you need at least a zoning permit. So if you want to build a 10 by 10 by 10 today, you just need a zoning permit. You don't need a building permit. Still has to meet codes. You just don't have to get a building permit.
What if you buy one of those?
Commercial is required either way.
Yeah, gotcha. You go to Lowe's and you see one of those, I'll call them plastic, I'm sure they're not plastic, but they're you bring it home and you snap it together, so to speak. If you go to Lowe's and buy one of those, you need a permit?
At minimum, a zoning permit if it's residential. If it's commercial, that building may not be adequate.
Right.
So we tell a lot of people, before you buy prefab items such as that, we always, urge folks to come in and ask first. Doesn't cost anything to come ask. Sometimes a survey is required. So if you're doing something within 10 feet of your property boundary, we're going to require a survey. So if you don't have room, or you're wanting to put it really close to your property line, we have a 5-foot standard, but there's also sometimes easements that are within that area. So that's why the 10-foot rule comes into play. So before you buy a $500 or $1,000 shed, or whatever they cost nowadays, I haven't priced one in a while.
Yeah.
We always recommend that you come have a conversation, call us, send us an email, so that we can look and see what you're looking at, so that you can factor that into the equation.
And should they call you and say, this is what I'm thinking about doing, and you say, yes, you will need a zoning permit or whatever,
Yes.
they would come here and be able to get what they need?
They can come to City Hall, normal work days, Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. They can come to the Planning and Permitting Inspections Office, and somebody can assist.
Yeah.
They can call, they can email. Our contact information should be on the website, so that they can reach out to myself or Jeremy, either one. And, the very first thing we ask folks is, what's your address? Because just because you have Jacksonville in your address doesn't mean that you are in our jurisdiction. Jacksonville's only for the city limits in the area 1 mile outside the jurisdiction, roughly, which is the extraterritorial jurisdiction, or ETJ. So beyond that, it would be the county or another municipality. So, and this same advice really goes with wherever you are. Call whoever the local government having authority is. And so if you're in Onslow County, call the county. Unless you're in Richlands, well, then call Richlands and ask them. And then if you're in Holly Ridge, call them. And we always start with, where's the address? Because we get calls from Jacksonville, Florida fairly routinely. Usually the area code's the first thing where we say, hey, hold on, can we interrupt just for a second? Are you calling about Jacksonville, North Carolina? No, I'm calling about Jacksonville, Florida. Like, okay, well, different phone number, and it happens a lot. From what I understand, I think we're, when you Google it, I think we're number 2.
Yeah, if you ask Google or Siri, they'll tell you.
Oh, yeah.
They're calling the Jacksonville Planning Department, and it's usually us.
We've had some very interesting calls, so we've kind of adapted over the years. We want to try to get an address first and foremost, because if you don't need to be giving us all of your life history because you're not in our jurisdiction, we want you to save yourself because we don't want you to become more frustrated. And then when you make that second call, you're already frustrated because you're having to repeat yourself all over again. But so that's the first thing that we do is, where are you located? We want to make sure you're in our jurisdiction. So.
And, my takeaway from this is, if you're going to do something like that, yes, you need something, so make a call.
Yeah, that goes for any. If you want to buy a sign, if you want to buy or lease a piece of property and you want to use it for a certain way, it's free to come ask.
Yeah, very good. Thank you very much, Ryan. We are now smarter than we were a few minutes ago. I would entertain a motion to adjourn this meeting.
So moved.
We have a motion to adjourn. A second? Chase is seconding that. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.